Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, delegates, welcome to the second day of the Finance in Common Summit. I trust you all had a pleasant first day. I trust you had an insightful first day. And I hope that through this journey on the second day, we can deepen the conversations that began yesterday, taking them a step further, going beyond just the commitments that we intend to honor and committing to finding actionable solutions and discussing those solutions and how we implement those solutions. It's my privilege to be able to guide you through the second day and to take you through some of the discussions that we will be having in this and other plenaries going forward. The first plenary that we're going to get into today is building on from yesterday's closing plenary around PDBs and what PDBs do from a role perspective, the role that they play, and the impact that they can have in terms of influence and in terms of moving things forward. We're going to be having two discussions in this morning plenary session. The first discussion will be chaired by Ms. Maura Cravero. She is the director at the MDB Challenge Fund. We will be looking at the role of development banks in the ecosystem, looking at how development banks are able to further their presence or use and leverage their influence to ensure that we achieve the desired objectives that we set out. The second panel would be an expansion of the first panel, in which the moderator of that panel, the Director General of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Rodrigo Salvador, will take us through the role of external stakeholders and those that partner with development banks. Stakeholders from the private sector, stakeholders from industry, stakeholders from government organizations, and everything else that comes together to ensure that the objectives of the solutions that are found are actually met. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the members of the first panel, starting, of course, with the chair of the panel. That would be Ms. Maura Cravero, as I mentioned. If she could please come up on stage. And while she does, I'll just give you an idea of who will be joining her on this particular panel of discussions. The president of the Inter-American Development Bank, Ilan Goldfern, would be joining us. If I could just ask that as I read the delegates' names or the panelists' names, that they please come onto stage, and then we will then begin the panel discussion. President Jin Lee Chun of the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank. President Alvaro Lario of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. President of the Council for Europe Development Bank, that is President Carlo Monticelli. And I believe the final member of the panel will be the President of the West African Development Bank, Serge, that's President Serge Ekwe. I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of our moderator to take us through this session. At the end of the session, we will take a brief break to just switch over to the new panel and conclude the conversation thereafter.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jimmy, and thank you, everyone, for joining us in this session today. Now, Finance in Common is about bringing people and organizations together, and we've heard a lot about collaboration and cooperation in this room yesterday, in the breakout sessions, in conversations, in the corridors, on the sides. Now, throughout the entire venue. And MDB and PDB collaboration will be the key theme of this session. Now, what does collaboration mean? It's a nice idea, but here is, summit of solutions. So what we're really looking at is, what does that mean in practice? How do we do collaboration? How do we play to the respective strengths of MDBs and PDBs, organizations that each have their own mandates, their own specificities, their own areas of expertise, and take advantage of those synergies to impact people's lives, which is, in the end, what everybody in this room is after. Now, that's not an easy task. If it was easy, we would have already done it. But we have a great panel that bring expertise, that bring knowledge, that bring a track record of getting things done. And so who better to guide us through this discussion and go to really what next? Where do we go from there? how do we turn these conversations into practical actions on the ground, into key initiatives, into collaborations and partnerships and new ideas. So without further ado, let's start with our panelists. Now, President Jin, AIIB is the newest MDB. It has partnership front and center of its business model, and you're one of the co-hosts of this initiative. So from this perspective, what do you see as the key gaps and opportunities for MDBs to collaborate more closely with the broader compact of public development banks and national development banks to accelerate and scale infrastructure investment?
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to this session. And I'd like to share with you our ideas, suggestions, and experience with regard to the cooperation between the multilateral development banks and public or national development banks. We in AIIB are very much honored and privileged to have the opportunity to co-host FIX with Remy Hugh, AFD, and also with DBSA, Development Bank of Southern Africa, with Ms. Mosako. I think this is a very important initiative. I said yesterday briefly that for me, financing commons means we share the same objective by pulling our resources together to make the cake bigger and to have the impact greater. On the other hand, I also say, financing commons means fix problems. Fix problems, fix whatever is not doing properly. And there are lots of challenges for us to address. So as the youngest development institution, the new kid on the block, we are not that young. We are 10 years old, and next year we will be a teenager. But most importantly, we build on the experience of well-established development banks. We remain in the gene pool of the MDBs, multilateral development banks, but we have special features. And this means we cover broad areas for investment. Don't be misguided or misled by the title, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The misconception comes in two areas. One, they thought we are an Asian institution, we focus on Asia. This is not true. This is not true. Because we do not believe Asia, even though Asian countries are the initiators for creating this bank, we do not believe confining our business in Asia is a solution. Asia cannot sustain itself without connectivity with other regions, without economic, trade, cross-border investment with other countries in other regions. So this is I think sometimes this title, the name of our bank, is a little bit misleading. And some people ask me the question, since you invest beyond Asia, do you think you need to change the title, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank? I said, no. This name is perfect. Because A means Asia, Africa, Latin America, AAA. Okay. But Asian Infrastructure Investment just indicates that Asian countries initiated this. But in the making of the bank, we invite all of the countries in joining. We start to negotiate from 10 to 22. Eventually, we have 57 countries, including almost all of the European countries and Canada. Now, there is another misunderstanding. People thought they joined the bank. No, that's wrong. All these 57 members join in the making of the bank. There's a crucial difference. Joining an institution when all the rules of the game were made. You take it or leave it. In this case, developing countries and developed countries work together, joining hands in making this new institution. Even though the developed countries are minority shareholders, developing countries are the major shareholders. We have no problem working together. So this is very much important. And based on this logic, we are fully prepared to work with, and we already work with some of the national development banks or PDBs, because we share the same objective. What is the significance of working or partnership between MDBs and PDBs? MDBs are multilateral institutions. We cover all of the areas. Whereas public development banks are mostly those development banks created by the sovereign government. And they are on the ground, they know more about the reality. So by working together, we can leverage resources and we can identify better projects. You see, we keep talking about financing, leveraging the resources, mobilizing public sector, private sector, which is perfectly all right. But it's not so often people talking about how to identify very good projects. Project identification is key. And by working with PDBs, we can better identify the development projects. And then we find something is very good, we work together. So we leverage our knowledge and innovation and all these kind of important aspects beyond the financing. This is what we believe is very much important. And also by working with the public development banks, we know what is the priority of the sovereign governments, what is their priority of developing basic infrastructure. So I want to highlight the point. Our bank's objective is to promote broad-based economic and social development through investment in infrastructure and other productivities. The mandate is broad enough to comprehend all of the important things. Don't be misguided again by the infrastructure. What do you mean by infrastructure? You mean roads, railways, airports, seaports? True, but we also do digital projects, try to reduce digital divide. We also do social infrastructure, such as health, because, you know why? Because we invest in other productive sectors. When we negotiate the articles agreement, we decide on the mandate of the bank. You see, this mandate can cover all of the areas, all of the PDBs do. So people asking me, Mr. Jun, what do you mean by infrastructure and other productive sectors? And I said, the answer is very simple. Other productive sectors means other productive sectors. We can do lots of things together. I can say virtually any PDB intends to do, we can do. It falls within our articles agreement. We believe that only by working together, actually it's kind of a tripartite. MDBs, PDBs, private sector. By working together, we can do massively in infrastructure and other productive sectors, thereby paving the path for sustainable development. Yesterday I said, what we are doing here, we are building the landing strip for international investors, land safely in any of the countries and establish themselves, promoting sustainable development. This is what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I really like this idea of working together to increase the size of the pie, but also to identify better projects and lay the foundations for sustainable development. Now, on to our next speaker, President Goffin. IADB is also a strong supporter of FIX. You co-hosted very successfully the last summit in Cartagena, and you've had a leading role in the FIX Innovation Lab, which is having great traction in advancing concrete innovative proposals, and that we've been hearing a lot these days. You gave us a taster in yesterday's opening ceremony, but would you tell us more about these innovations and the way in which IDB and MDBs in general are engaging with the broader PDB system to accelerate and scale financing for development in Latin America?
So thank you. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for this question. It's a pleasure to hear Jean talking about AIIB, about the name. Our name is Inter-American Development Bank. and it's really about Inter-American. So it's no issues there. We are not adolescents. We are not adolescents. We have 65 years old, but we don't feel that we are old, because age in society, 65 is actually young. So we feel we are young. We have 26 members of the region, but also 22 members outside. I just went to Japan, where I met what we call the non-regionals. And there I heard about a great Japanese writer, Ryonosuke Satoru. And he says a very nice phrase that says, individually, we are one drop. But together, we are an ocean. And I feel that MDBs with PDBs, we can be an ocean. And let me tell you a little bit of how we are seeing our engagement with the PDBs. And then I can talk about the lab and what are we doing in terms of some of these innovations. So with PDBs, we are working quite a bit. We cannot reach the national retail. We cannot reach the banks. We cannot reach the small and medium. We cannot do it without the public development banks, local expertise, and all the network. We need to work together. And we do it all across Latin America. The PDBs can scale what we do in a very important way. The reason we do it together is not to crowd out the private sector. It's actually to crowd in the private sector. We enter the market where we believe there is some failure, where we believe that there needs to be some guarantees. Small and medium companies. It's sometimes hard for the private sector to offer the lending and the loan because of the cost of reaching all the information of individual companies. So they are underbanked, underfinanced. We enter and we try to do it. So IDB, in the last several years, has already approved 75 loans with 40 national development banks in the region. 17 countries of our 26 already had our engagement. We have done $9 billion. And we were able to co-finance 18 billion out of this 9 billion. So leverage is there. Overall, if you want to see what we are doing, 14%, and I said it in the other day, 14% of our sovereign portfolio was channeled through the NDBs. So we are working on areas like financial inclusion, small and medium enterprises, digital infrastructure, social housing. I can give you several examples. For example, in the Amazonia Forever, one of our flagship programs, we created the Green Coalition, 17 MDBs, 3 MDBs, all together for a region, for a purpose. Let me talk now about the collaboration with FIX, the Financial Innovation Lab. We created it together. We were in Cartagena. We had a dream. We launched it later, and now it's working. It has 4 working groups. We're going to work with debt resilient clauses, the famous CDRCs. We have a working group on debt for nature swaps. We have a group on FX risk management. And we have a group on carbon markets. They're all working together in this lab to get innovation, to get new products to work for the countries. Where are we going now? And I'm going to end there. We want to increase the scope of this lab to go beyond climate, to have other parts also. So we can use the same instruments to go farther in our scope, in our innovation. So we are an ocean. We're already working together. And our lab is the latest innovation together with FIX. Thank you.
Great. So, coalitions as a notion that can reach the hardest spots is a great way to think about what this room can do and people on this stage can do. Now we're on to Governor Monticelli. You are the current chair of the Heads of MDBs group for this year. And as such, you're leading the coordination of MDBs working as a system, including on the G20 MDB roadmap. What opportunities do you see for PDBs to join that systemic action agenda, including supporting the deliverables that heads agreed as part of their viewpoint note?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for having me here. Council of Europe Development Bank, it is Europe, so no misnomer there, but still I can offer some more global reflection given my current role as a chair of the group of heads of MDBs. As you know, the group last year really had a quantum leap in the intensity and quality of cooperation under the leadership of Elan, who was the chair last year. We gave a very important contribution to the development of the G20 roadmap through our viewpoint note. And this year, the momentum of cooperation is to be maintained to deliver on those commitments. These commitments are ambitious, so whatever help we can get, we are very happy to take, and clearly PDBs are a very important resource to tap to work together to achieve these objectives. Now, collaboration between MDBs and PDBs are already quite intense in terms of flow of financing. My colleagues quote some figures. I just want for the SEB quote only one that in the last 10 years, 20% of our financing went to PDBs. But there is more that can be done together, most importantly around increasing co-financing. Not financing, co-financing. And this is easier said than done because it requires just the joint approach to, first of all, finding and originating projects. We know that there is not only an issue of credit supply, but also an issue of credit demand, because very often good ideas are not yet bankable projects. So there is the need to find good ideas around and then to turn them into bankable projects. And the diversity of PDBs are really a tremendous asset to this effect. But to do that, one has to complement the sharing of pipelines with the sharing of knowledge, with the sharing of good practices. And all of this, ideally, should be done maintaining a very flexible and easy approach towards the client, the borrower. And this might entail, as we are discussing within our group, try to move forward in the agenda of mutual reliance in terms of standard. So there is really a very important scope for enhancing the cooperation between MDBs and PDBs in delivering on our common agenda to sustain the attainment of development goals. But for this to take place, not only inspiration is needed, but also a lot of perspiration in just going through these specific points that I just quoted.
Thank you. And I guess that is the part where it's less easy, all these practical, very concrete things that need to happen to enable that collaboration and that increase in cooperation. Now, on to our final speaker, President Ekwek, who is here also as co-chair of the International Development Finance Club. Quite an important club, quite an example of collaboration. Together, it's the largest provider of public development and climate finance globally, with 4 trillion in combined assets, 27 national and regional development banks as members. So what opportunities do you see for IDFC members to scale climate finance and accelerate SDG implementation? And what would you identify from more of the PDB perspective as the key constraints or gaps that can be filled through MDB-PDB collaboration?
Well, thank you very much for having me, first of all, and thank you very much for your question. I've heard so many interesting things here, and that resonates very much with IDFC, which is, as you rightly said, is a consortium of 27 banks gathered around 2 or 3 key elements. The first one is the question of collaboration. As it has been mentioned earlier, we collaborate, we exchange ideas, sharing the pipeline, sharing the ideas. We also have a climate facility. In other words, we facilitate and support the different initiatives taken by our members. We also have this, we also work a lot on the capacity building. So not only the question of facility, but also the question of how do we move up the value chain, how from a technical standpoint do we work on more and more on ways to facilitate the bankability, if I may use this word, of the different projects. So it is a consortium. We pool resources. We try as much as we can to co-syndicate, to co-finance, share ideas, share platform with the help of our facility, the climate facility. So it's a mix between, very interesting mix between very good rated entities, institutions like Agence Française de Développement or KfW, the AA, AAA institution, with more challenging institutions. So it means that the question of the not only the risk sharing, but the question of the risking of our risk is on top of our agenda, which literally means that as we are on the ground, very close to the action, by definition and structurally by default, we are risk takers by structure, by definition. And then we try to find ways to work with better rated institutions to see how we can de-risk our portfolios. You see? So I think it's a way for us to illustrate, I would say, modern ways of financing the development in our respective continents. If I may add one or two words, this question of de-risking. I said earlier that it was a modern ways of finding, funding, financing our projects. But also, I think it's a new wave of reshaping the international financial architecture, because it's modern ways of cooperation, modern ways of doing business, modern ways of, when it comes, for example, to originating projects, we originate and we make sure that the question of the value of the evaluation of our risk is perfectly taken care of.
Thank you so much. And a great example of using the different characteristics of each institution to leverage finance. Now, we still have a few minutes left, and we have a quick fire round, a final question for all our panelists. That question is, can you give us one or two, if they're really good, key solutions or ideas that we should be looking to scale, to accelerate, to implement coming out of the summit, so that we can maximize the mutual leverage we've been talking about to respond to these gaps and challenges and deliver for your clients and for the world? President Jin.
I think there are some ideas which will be floating around for us to sort out how best we can promote the cooperation between MDBs and national development banks. And I think one thing is that we can support the PDBs through technical assistance and capacity building. And we can also work with them to unlock some of the resources which may not be easily accessible to the PDBs. And also, I think by working together, we can, as I said, design better projects, and particularly in working together to strengthen implementation of the operations. People are often very much worried about the costs of borrowing. Certainly cost is an issue, but sometimes people overlook the very important point of good design and good implementation. If a project is not well done, it could be delayed years and years. The huge cost, right? If the project is completed on time, start to generate revenues, a couple pips of interest rate is not a problem. That's why this kind of, I think, things are very much important. We want to work with them. And by the way, I want to highlight that we work at the Brazilian bank, the BNDES, and also we work with other institutions to develop the operations. So we are already starting to do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. President Golfin.
So there are a few ideas that can help us leverage. I think the important thing is to be able to leverage to get more financing to what we need. So idea number one is to get the instrument that we are using and to try to broaden it. For example, the debt swaps. That brings a problem, which is debt. We give some guarantees, and we can then channel to the places we believe there are more. So we have been doing it for nature, Galapagos, Amazon. We have been doing it for climate, even resilience, like the case we are doing in Barbados. But
some common views on the priorities, on the key priorities have to be there for this collaboration really to be catalyzed into effective action. And this requires a strategic alignment on the key objectives. Second idea, country platforms. They have proved to be a very effective instrument to make collaboration among MDBs more effective. They can certainly be an instrument to make the collaboration between MDBs and PDBs more effective. Thank you.
Last but not least, President Eckert?
Yeah, surely not. Two things here. The first thing is capital mobilization. Fighting against climate change requires significant funding capacities. So the needs for MDBs and PDBs to attract more capital is a key element. And when it comes to public development bank, as you know, their funding capacity is limited. Their capacity to attract, to mobilize resources is limited, and most of the time limited to national budgets. So therefore, it is a strong constraint, a very high constraint. The question of how to fight against climate change, how to enhance the collaboration, starts with the quantum. What is the right level of capital mobilization? This is one thing. The second element is how to work with the private sector. As this been already said, but how to work with the private sector, how to attract new investors, how to have this relay between public and private sector, so as to work on techniques like blending finance. Blending finance is a key element needed and a key element we should promote more so as to find the right level of funding to fight against, for example, climate change.
Thank you very much for all these ideas. So, we have the strategic alignments and using instruments such as country platforms. We have the importance of capacity building and technical assistance to have good quality projects that are implemented well and creating the enabling conditions for PDBs and for the private sector to operate in together. And then we have capital mobilization, focusing on risks and who is best placed to tackle them, and broadening the instruments that are used to bring in this capital and to unlock resources, including blended finance, but we've mentioned swaps and others. Now, we have had a very fruitful conversation. I'd like to thank our panelists, but also DBSA, AIIB, and AFD for organizing all this. And now is off to implement all of these ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Ms. Crivero for chairing this panel, and thank you very much to the presidents of the various development banks for joining us. I think we can all agree that from a development bank perspective, there is a very clear message that is being articulated around the role of development banks in the ecosystem, and continuing to take a look at that ecosystem is our next panel. We're going to go straight into that panel in the interest of time. We're going to expand on the other stakeholders that sit within the ecosystem. It is not just the responsibility of development banks to ensure that these mandates are carried out, but there are other critical stakeholders that form part of this ecosystem. I'd like to jump straight into that panel, and I'd like to ask that the chair of, or the moderator rather, of that panel, Mr. Rodrigo Salvador, join me up on stage, please. He's, of course, the Director General at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So if you could just take a seat there for me. And the panelists that will be joining for this particular discussion, as I call them up, if we could just please welcome them onto stage so that we can get the panel underway. The head of the United Nations Development Program, Mr. Achim Steiner, the Chief Executive Officer of the Development Bank of Southern Africa, that is Boitumelo Mosako, the Deputy Chairperson of the Presidential Climate Commission, Mr. Crispian Olver, as well as the President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, Mr. Alvaro Lario. If my panelists could please join me on stage and join our moderator on stage so that we may begin the next session. While they do that, if we could please give them a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, you may notice that the panel is a little fuller than I may have announced. We were still waiting on a final arrival, and thank you very much to Ms. Mafalda Duarte, who is the CEO of the Green Climate Fund, for joining the panel as well. I will leave you in the capable hands of our moderator to begin the session, and I will see you thereafter.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know how capable I am, but anyway, I have to say first, thank you for all the attendees, right? I mean, the problem of having a good cocktail party, right, and the night is that the morning sessions get harder. But and I have to say that I'm so happy. I feel I can retire after moderating this panel, frankly. Yeah, right. So anyway. As a co-host of this, I am from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. I'm Rodrigo. I'm Director General of Operational Partnerships. Really, I'm thrilled to have this conversation today. Again, this is the Summit of Solutions, right? And I have in my panel here people that actually work and do things. I always think about, these working level discussions, and then I don't know what the other discussions are, but this should be a working level discussion. We all fighting the good fight, right? And each of you actually are doing what we have to do, which is actually partnering, solving people's problem, and actually thinking how people is going to be better after you do things. So, again, the first panel was about like NDBs, multilateral development banks and public development banks, and that's fine. But the world doesn't end in multilateral development banks, right? There's much more life beyond that, and I think that the issue here is about the broader ecosystems. So we're going to do 2 rounds today. The first one, we're going to be deeper a little bit. We're going to be asking a little bit about the gaps that you see, but also the solutions, right, that you're implementing. And the second round is going to be about your wish, right, about fix. What you think you should happen or what you would like to see happening more, right, not less. Let's be propositive. More after this. The other thing that I want you to keep in mind is that actually this is quite unique because we have both things happen at the same time between 200 meters here. We have fix and we have the G20. And believe me, it's a very, very interesting combination because of the war out there, how things are, and how basically we need to bring together the political setup and the leadership, and also the practitioners together. So one thing cannot happen without the other, but frankly, I do think that fix in these turbulent times, challenging times, is giving us a great setup actually for partnership and keep doing things. So without further ado, I'm going to go to Boitumelo first. And the reason is because I want us to kick us off basically there's a lot of eyes now on public development banks, right? I mean, we are surfacing this. There is kind of a hope in that, saying, well, you have a lot of assets under management, right? There are many, you are localized, you're closer to the people, right? So the question, I want to actually hear from you directly. There's a lot of assumptions about this, and I feel like, sometimes we say, well, PDBs will be doing this, will be doing that. DBSA have been doing this, and first, congratulations for the fix. What are you doing? What are the gaps that you see? What are the things that you're already doing and the things that actually you would like to see more? And what are the things that you would like to see from all the panels here, right? So they can respond to that, but you'd like to see actually partnering more of. So Boitumelo, welcome, and yes, floor is yours.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Good morning to everyone who is here. And thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel with the esteemed panelist. When I look around here, these are partners that we work with in executing our mandate as a development finance institution. Now, when we look at the role of DFIs, for instance, and this, because we're practical, right? So we're talking about things that we are doing. The Development Bank of Southern Africa, we have identified infrastructure as an enabler for economic development. And within our mandate, we're supposed to drive socio-economic development and capacity building. Now, on the infrastructure side, and something that unique that we do as an institution is we go beyond financing. We play along the infrastructure value chain. So we plan infrastructure, we prepare, so that's the project preparation facilities that we provide. We fund infrastructure, and that goes along the different instruments that we offer, whether it's debt, whether it's equity, whether it's MES, and recently we are now going into trade finance as well, because we have identified the gap there to actually enable greater participation when it comes, greater enablement when it comes to trade finance. We build, so we implement infrastructure, and I think that's something that's unique to us as a DFI, and this value, and we also maintain the last two value propositions that we offer as the bank. We identify to respond to the needs of our country and our region as well, to actually commoditize procurement and making sure that we augment state capacity to implement infrastructure. I think in the last 10 years, we've probably implemented infrastructure to the value of $1.5 billion. And we have a team of professionals that range from quantity surveyors to engineers, to architects, where we provide turnkey solutions. Now, and on the planning side, this specific service we provide to subnationals. Now, we at DFI, we don't just focus on major projects. We actually, when we say we are with where the people are, that's the role that we play. A key sector across the, a key clients that we provide services is subnational governments. So we provide technical assistance. We also provide funding to subnational governments. And the reason we do that is because subnational governments are the country where basic services are provided, whether we're talking water, whether we're talking waste management. That's where the services are provided. It's a key sector that we support. And when you look at the challenges around urbanization, migration, we do not only support cities, we also support rural municipalities as well. We were actually having a conversation. We actually signed an MOU, a collaboration agreement yesterday, about how we're going to strengthen our partnership to support rural municipalities. And that is a role that we play. And we were also deliberate in the sectors that we chose as a DFI: energy, transport, water, digital infrastructure, health, education, and affordable housing. So all of this value proposition, what does it do? It provides access to the citizens of South Africa. And remember, we're not only in South Africa, we also operate in sub-Saharan Africa as well. So I make the example that we might be a public development bank wholly owned by the South African government, but we actually operate like an MDB.
Be careful with that.
In that, in that we provide the suite of services in sub-Saharan Africa. So we are fully on the infrastructure spectrum, and we do that leveraging partnerships. smart partnerships are key. Mafaga is here. We are credited with GCF. She's supporting us with water reuse projects, with embedded generation projects. We are credited to the Global Environmental Facility as well. We are in partnership with Chippy Crispian here to support the country platform on climate. So when we talk about these smart partnerships, it's not only we are living it. You know, as I sit here, I am living these partnership that then provide solutions. When we talk about clean energy, we provide clean energy. You know, with these with the partnership, and it's beyond finance. It's also providing technical capacity building as well. And the one thing that I also want to mention is on the African continent, we also drive a lot of collaboration and coordination. Firstly, through the coordination of the Association of African DFIs, the SADC DFRC, and we also have what we call the Africa Investment Forum. And this is a collaboration between us as public development banks led by the African Development Bank, where we come together and we actually showcase regional integration projects, or in some instances local projects as well, and we invite investors to come and we showcase. So it's a great investment platform as well. So all of these elements are well coordinated and come together for us to execute our mandate.
Well, fantastic. I mean, many ways. Akim, Boitumelo mentioned everyone, so I hope that you are working also with UNDP, right? I mean, I get, it's not like, but like so many things that you said, and I hope that also I call that we've signed MOUs, no MOUs, right? So I hope that the one that you signed with Alvaro also is an MOU. So that takes me, I'm going to get next to Alvaro, actually. Alvaro, IFAD is working actually with one of the hardest, right, which is actually small farmers, right, and it's not easy, right, and get financing there, the risks that are embedded, right, knowledge, trust, right, building those things, and actually IFA has been a champion of networking and bringing people together, because it's the only way to work to get the scale. So Boitumelo said, that you just signed a new MOU, right? So, I would love to tell us more about that. I mean, also the things that you're doing, right? Give us hope, but also where you think that more DBSAs. Imagine if you have, I don't know, how many? Do we have 500? If we have 500 DBSAs there doing this work, it would be a better place, right? So, what is the experience from your end in IFAD?
Well, thank you very much. I think, as you said, scale and aggregation are probably two of the key matters for us in terms of small-scale farmers. We know in terms of the public sector that for food security, for example, in Africa, there's an investment around 3% of GDP, which is very low. We also see that even ODA is very low in terms of agriculture and food systems, around 5%. So that clearly is not going to move the needle. So we talk about private sector. I saw it in the previous panel. It reminds me to Addis Ababa already 10 years ago. I think what we have not been managing on how to really enable private sector, and I'll talk about PDBs, is because of the risk appetite of many of the organizations, because of the instruments that we're using, which are not appealing. The international private sector is very clear. They want to scale up goods, services for a certain demand. We never talk in these places about demand. But then the local private sector needs an enabling environment, which we know. So for me, one of the solutions and in aggregation, in scale, to really reach out to the hundreds of millions of small-scale farmers is PDBs. If we think about their portfolios, they, well, for a reason, perhaps for a return reason, for a policy reason, they focus very much on the big infrastructure, the bigger dams, the bigger water aggregation, the big roads, which are very important for economic growth. But we're currently seeing a way of really trickling down. One is with Development Bank of South Africa, but there's many examples. Yesterday I was with NABARD, with India, with FIR in Mexico, with Malawi. We are working almost everywhere. Indeed, we are co-leading, for many who are in the room and are also part of it, the Agri-PDB platform, which is currently 140 institutions organizations in 96 countries. And actually, it's a way really to aggregate, to get the interest in many cases of the government in that first mile of investment. So for us, it's a very important way. Climate financing is something that the platform currently is working on, either helping on the accreditation, helping on the practices, and that's very key, because whether we are talking about the world where climate doesn't seem to be now at the forefront, but it is, at least in food security, soil health will continue to be fundamental, floods, droughts will continue to happen, so it's very clear that the hundreds of millions of small-scale farmers still need to have a business, and for that, climate, for example, and Mafalda here will be still fundamental in the way forward. So this is an appeal to really not only, and it's not only PDBs. To be frank, yesterday we were talking about, SACCOs, about primary credit associations, farmer-producer organizations. There's also a lot of levels in the middle of many of the financial systems where PDBs can also help. They have the local knowledge, and it will be fundamental in order to continue aggregating and scaling up, which is the big challenge. Let me finalize by saying the private sector, some of us go from time to time to Davos, and when we talk to the big multinationals, frankly, in my sector, we're talking about tens of thousands, even the biggest. Here, the issue, and for us in IFAD, we're increasing the income of 77 million small-scale farmers. It's not the same to talk about thousands than about millions. And I think for that, PDBs will be really fundamental.
Again, I mean, I think, that's exactly the point, how we actually get new partnerships to reach the hardest places, right? I think, as public institutions, we need to go where is the hardest to go, right? And again, try not to crowd in, not to crowd out. Mafalda, you have been named a couple of times already, not only here, I have to say, right? But again, I mean, a lot of also the things that GCF has been trying to do is precisely to localize more, right? And again, I mean, from your perspective, these are obviously challenging times in many ways, but you have been, again, pushing this agenda and actually expanding your partnership also from the organizational perspective in the GCF. And again, doing through this type of, alliances. So from your perspective right now, right, and again, I mean, the climate agenda, which, we need to keep fighting for, what you see as the main roles or handshakes with the PDBs, right? But also, with all of the partners, institutions that you actually have here.
Yeah, I'll come. Thank you, Rodrigo. And thank you for your energy. It's great. I'll come to the partnerships because all of these colleagues here are partners. And so we sit in quite a privileged position here. But let me just make a couple of points before. And also the reason why we are here and I'm here in Finance in Common Summit. Because I think it's important that we all collectively realize and make others realize what are we talking about here. This group of institutions, which, most people out there will not even know. We are talking about 530 organizations globally that have trillions under management. Even if we say, okay, 70% of them are in developed economies, we still have 30% and DBSA being an example here. So this is a really significant group of organizations with a significant pool of capital and resources. So then the question is, what do we collectively need to do, including governments, to unlock more of this capital? And they've been playing a critical role, by the way. If we look at it, the public organizations have been playing more of a role than the private investors. And we saw that in the context of the pandemic and the post-pandemic. So then the question becomes, how do we use this public money and what are the relevant partnerships around this public money to unlock the private money, because that's where then the bigger trillions that are necessary for the transition are necessary. So I think this is also why I was telling Remy yesterday, we were in this meeting and Achim was there as well, but I think you exited that. When we have a communique coming out of this summit, let's make it such that the wider public understands the role of these organizations. And what is it that we should ask the governments to mandate or to give guidance to these organizations to focus on, so that, we push for this transition. Now, there's this question of the system, because the title of the session is quite interesting, making the system work in a more inclusive way. And this is where, GCF comes in. We sit in quite a privileged position because, and probably 90% of you will not know, but actually our partners are as diversified as it can get. Because we work with the multilateral development banks, we work with the national development banks, with the regional development banks, with the UN agencies, with the private sector, different types of private sector. So we have really this broad mandate and breadth of partners that we work with. And even though we see in our portfolio some really interesting programs, projects, where some of them are coming together, and we provide this catalytic capital, because our capital is the most flexible that we find in this system, is the one that takes on higher risk, that is more concessional, that is more long-term or patient, that can be structured in many different ways, using many instruments. So we see some powerful structures or projects in our portfolio where some of them come together, but have we untapped the full potential? No. This is also the reason why in a recent restructure of the organization, we've now really created a dedicated department to help us really forge these partnerships between organizations and amplify the scale of investments that we can actually make collectively as a system in developing countries. So I've been saying yesterday and already for some time, it's really important to focus on the system. And we are not inventing the wheel here. I mean, we have multiple reports out there that talk about the importance of not just focusing on the reform of the MDBs, but focusing on how do we mobilize the domestic capital, including from the national development banks. How do we mobilize the private sector capital, and then the really critical role of the concessional capital, which is where we come in, the flexible concessional capital, to unlock the system. So we need to talk about the system. And I hope that that's what we do more of in the lead up to the Finance for Development and in the lead up to COP.
Right. Well, great. And I think, in many ways, the NDBs were doing making MDBs working as a system, but we need to have PDBs working as a system, the UN working as a system. So we need to all be working together. I think the question is also, there's a lot of things that are happening that people don't know, right? So we need to actually bring it together, surface them, right? And the things not to reinvent the wheel, but actually replicate the things that are actually working. So I think, on that note, Akim, I'm going to go to you now. I think we are on the run. I'm convinced that we shouldn't actually forget totally, have amnesia, then go to FFD4, have amnesia, go to COP, have amnesia. I mean, we need to actually basically bring the things together, right? This is about systemic things. And, people believe that they can't have to come up with new stuff every time we talk, but we should be having on the same messages. Right, so obviously UNDP is one of the most active organizations, but also working again on capacity building, technical assistance, but also you're working on things that have to do with the country plans, right? What the countries are helping to identify that through integrated country financing frameworks, et cetera, et cetera. So you partner with organizations, Hakim. So we'd love to get also your take on this and also your vision going into FFD4, right? How we actually make that connection.
Thank you, Rodrigo. And I was first sort of judging a little bit that Chippy and I are sitting on the end of how you spend money wisely, and you have all the money sitting on this side of the panel, right? So, and I sit at the end of it, which is perhaps, symbolic for the moment in time we live in. But let me first of all say what a pleasure it is to be here at FIX. And again, to congratulate all of you who have over a number of years been able to first of all, put a spotlight on this extraordinary network. I mean, Mafalda just mentioned the numbers again, the trillions of dollars that are assets that you, in a sense, are custodian of in the name of development, which makes us already, by definition, partners, and yet we are talking about partnerships and also how systems sometimes can coexist. You see, I work for UNDP, so I'm part of the United Nations system. And in some ways I was thinking, how do I best describe this relationship with the world of public development banks? And I would perhaps say, in one sense, you go upstream. Because in order for countries to agree on what are priorities, and particularly that moment in 2015 when we adopted that 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, I think in history books it will still be recognized as the moment when the world for the first time articulated that development is not about rich countries helping poor countries trying to figure out how to finance from an ODA pot that is ever shrinking really, but rather, first of all, that we have a shared interest and we have a shared capacity to invest. And the United Nations, often, driven and sometimes constrained by lots of public interest, is a platform where we are able to frame the signals and directional shifts, whether it was Paris 2015, whether it was the 2030 agenda. And I want to give you one example that to me is fascinating. We look at a global energy market as essentially a very amorphous, very nationally driven phenomenon. But one thing that illustrates to me how effective we can sometimes be when we actually take the science of climate change and then begin to translate it over decades, let's be honest, it took us a long time, into very, first of all, a global set of commitments, but then translating them at the national level. Last year, total investments in new electricity generating infrastructure, according to the IEA, was $3 trillion. Maybe to those who are inside the sector, not so surprising. The extraordinary fact to me is that 2 out of those $3 trillion were in clean energy, electricity generating infrastructure. So one of the things that we do, so to speak, is to help mature, accelerate markets into which the public development banks can then find a policy context. Chippy, you will, I'm sure, allude to that also, and an investment context, as you, when we just described in the context of DBSA and Alvaro as well. And obviously, the kind of concessional finance that is then represented by the GCF is the kind of catalyst, the trigger. So we are part of that upstream work, but we actually, as UNDP, very much also part of the downstream work, because what very often happens is, at a national level, you need to find institutions, capacities, but also the design capacity to develop programs, projects, investment propositions that are, in a sense, implementable, not just from the point of view of those who finance it, but also from those who are being financed. And I think we all know that in many of our countries, we are still struggling, particularly if you're not going simply at the top 10% of a, let's say, private sector-led universe in the economy, but actually go to the majority of enterprises that are usually small and medium scale. Our work with many of your institutions in your countries are in part so successful because we consider UNDP to be part of a national ecosystem, but we also connect it to best practice. In that sense, that design capacity, and why, for example, with the GCF, with the GEF, with the Multilateral Fund of the Montreal Protocol, with the Global Fund, very often UNDP is amongst the #1 choices as a partner, because that ability to co-design, both in national reality terms, the laws of gravity of the nation, but also taking best practices into account, is something, when it works well, can really make a difference. So what I would say, sitting together here, we also need to recognize that the financing for development landscape is becoming very constrained, and that's a diplomatic term to use. I've just come out of the G20, where we talked about tax and taxation. One of the things that we also need to think about and do, and that is very much part of what UNDP does through tax support, is to also raise the ability of governments to finance the public development banks. Because at the end of the day, the beauty of public development, particularly the national development banks, is that they are actually nationally funded and therefore also driven by national implementation agendas. And that is something that is very close to our heart.
Well, thank you so much. And again, I mean, I hold Akim for the next round, right, for the wish. Again, where do you want to take us, right, for FFD4? I mean, I think my sense is that the handshake between, UN agencies and the rest of the system also is very important, right? And again, it's all about, like, working together. I'm very amazed or, surprised that the issue of country platforms didn't come up in this panel yet. So, and I think everyone made a pact with Crispian, so Crispian can actually do it. So Crispian, you have been at the beginning of this week, right? You have been in a workshop of country platforms, and country platforms have become like sort of the place where everything has to come together, right? I mean, everyone has a lot of hopes on this idea of country platform, which in my mind is no other than hey, let's organize ourselves, right? So basically, if we are going to do something in a country, right, make sure that this is actually, we follow country priorities, right? And then let's make sure that actually we coordinate and we do it better. But again, I know there's a lot of energy about this and also a lot of countries that are taking the leadership to do that. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And then if you can actually bring us on how this partnership actually could look like, right, from the country perspective in the context of country platforms.
Thank you, Rodrigo. And just to say, I think they were all talking about platforms in one form or another. These are, the different elements that make it up. So as you said, we've just concluded a 2-day engagement on country platforms. An enormous amount of commonality with the discussions I'm seeing here at FIX. For those of you that don't know what platforms are, so they were started around just energy transition partnerships. South Africa led the way at COP26. Indonesia and Vietnam followed. Mafalda was there at the beginning wearing a different hat, playing a very important supportive role in cajoling these platforms. What's exciting is that you're seeing the concept evolve. So, you had Egypt put a nexus of food, water, and energy platform on the table. You've seen Brazil come forward with an ecological transformation program anchored around BNDES, their National Development Bank. Colombia's doing stuff. There's a new cohort of African countries wanting to pursue platforms like Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda and Nigeria. So we're evolving the concept. We're looking at sectors that are traditionally a little bit harder to fund, the adaptation and nature class of sectors, and you're seeing the application of the model to countries that are a little bit harder to fund. Moving into less developed countries, smaller countries, SIDS are embracing the concept. What platforms have shown is that they have an ability to mobilize large-scale finance from diverse financial resources behind an integrated, country-led program. And when I use the word program, it's more than just a basket of projects. It's linked to a set of systemic reforms that drive transformation in sectors. And, the foundation, I guess, we throw around this term country-owned and country-led, and it's vitally important. But you can't just claim the mantle without doing something. And the foundation for these platforms is really creating the right domestic environment to enable them to go to scale. So that means, addressing fiscal sustainability, putting the governance and regulatory structures in place, putting the systemic reforms in place, building efficient secretariats that can drive this thing, negotiate with the different components of the capital stack. So, that's it about platforms. What I want to do is turn to financing and MDBs and NDBs. So, we've all made the point in different ways, but just to restate it, the financing needs to work in an integrated way. You've got all these different components, own contributions, grant, whatever you can squeeze out of this diminishing ODA pot, the vertical climate funds, various forms of concessional finance and blended finance, and then, of course, the markets themselves. And we need to follow a subsidiarity principle. So we push on to the private sector whatever we can get them to do, including getting them to pursue social and climate and public good objectives. And within this, MDBs and NDBs have a fundamentally important role to play. I was really struck by President Xin's comments earlier about building this landing strip for investors. I thought that, captures the idea very well. So, I saw at COP29 the statement by the MDBs, very forward-looking statement on their role in these country platforms. What I think is missing is, and FIX I think can trigger this, is a statement that more clearly articulates the role of national banks in anchoring these things and drawing on the lessons that Brazil has given us. So I'll leave it at that.
Excellent timing, actually, Crispian, because we have 10 minutes left. So we are 5, you have 5, and then I can give you 2 minutes for your wish to fix, for FIX, right? And again, or what are the things that you want to see happening more? You hinted at it, but if you want to have your pick. And the reason why I'm asking this is because we're trying to build this sort of catalog of things, right? I mean, again, we need to be, not each of us doing the same thing. We are talking about integration here and actually coming together. So it's an idea that you have that you want others to actually chip in and work with you on that. What that will be. So let me start with Hakim. And again, on the road to FFD4, also I know FFD4 is going to be calling for the Sevilla initiatives, right? So these things. So, we can work between now and then to kind of prioritizing. But what is the one wish, again, or one thing that you like to see thinking or happening more?
A 30-second bracket just in terms of these country platforms. I did not mention the first, but one of the things that I would like to emphasize, we need to also very much taking Chippy's point, these platforms need to be nationally led and nationally driven. So the integrated national financing frameworks, which are now happening in 86 countries, is an example that is not institutionally bound, because sometimes with MDBs or the UN or bilaterals, we end up in institutionally driven platforms. Our commitment has been very much with the INFFs, which will feature also at the Finance for Development, was that these are nationally led processes that allow a country to look at the full spectrum of financing and then provide the kind of direction, which in turn will also translate into signals for public development banks. My wish, a much greater focus on the micro, small and medium scale enterprises. I spent a whole day this week here in South Africa with South African entrepreneurs, listening to, even in a mature economy with a financial system and a public policy as mature as South Africa's is, listening to many of the frustrations and the barriers that small and medium scale enterprises face. We often look at large corporations and in GDP terms as being the big returns on investment. The largest players are, in fact, in the private sector, small, medium-scale enterprises. Can we try and target them more explicitly? That's where the jobs are being created. That's where we combine return on investment with also a return on people's livelihoods. And I think particularly the national development banks, the public development banks, need to be, in a sense, the pioneers here, because it is a very nation and national economy-specific reality. And our instruments that we can bring as international partners need to be led by that deep understanding. And in South Africa, I don't know whether the number is correct, but even in today's world, there are 56 public instruments in South Africa to support small, medium-scale enterprises. Yet during the pandemic and after the pandemic, the South African government put an extraordinary fund together, I think 100 billion rand. And yet only a fraction that was actually then dispersed because the system, right, and here we come back to systems, are not necessarily at the point yet where they can reach this capillary structure where the majority of people are actually the private sector entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, Hakim. And then, so I want to go to Álvaro now, right? Because again, also working on the hardest, and the things that you mentioned on acceleration, aggregation, scale, Álvaro. So if there's anything that you'd like to see happening more, or an initiative that IFAD is actually championing, and you actually like to crowd in more, resources and partners into this, and take this also through FFD4 and COP, what that will be?
So I fully agree with Hakim. I think and I think Mafalda mentioned the local private sector for that has meant also a change, a restructuring of the organization, trying to use our own funding also to co-invest with the private sector, make sure that our 9 billion portfolio of loans also has entry points for the local private sector. So I think all of us need to continue evolving. In terms of the community, let me just very briefly mention food systems. So one of the challenges I see when I go to very different events, whether it's from the UN, the private financial sector, the MDBs, it seems we speak different languages. There's no common language. In food systems, actually, after 2021, we had something that is the food systems national pathways, the investment platform. So let's say the structure is there, but it seems Sometimes, for example, the PDBs don't know about it. The private sector doesn't know about it, but there's a common language, there's a common framework to see where the investments need to go. So I think for us, it's to coordinate and to make sure that there's that focus on those principles, on those priorities, which are nationally and government driven for investments in food systems. And then it's a matter of how we channel them. But I think that's a key part of trying to at least be aligned, where you call it country platform. In this case, it's nationally driven pathways for food systems, but that will be important to try to also, in this case for food systems, but for finance for development, not try to put a new vehicle, reinvent the wheel. We already had the perfect text in 2015. Now it's a matter of what are the instruments and the concrete ways to making it happen.
Fantastic, Alvaro. And again, I mean, I totally agree with that. It's not about like new shiny things every time, but actually scaling what we need, what we have. Boitumelo, I will go to last, okay? So, Mafalda, your wish, one wish.
I would have a whole set. But I mean, thinking of the times we are in, we see various attempts to polarize, and we see various attempts to make people believe that actually the mission we are on in terms of climate and development is not a socially just mission. This is the socially just mission, because we already know that those that are being disproportionately affected by climate are, you know, those that have less means, and they are the ones that will stand to have greater impact. So I think my wish is that as we talk about the finance system and how to bring the finance system together, and I think there are ample opportunities, including through country platforms. And I think South Africa is very attuned to this because, you know, they've had to do a lot on what we call just transition. But there's also, you know, making sure that it's central to what we do and part of the narrative, but that we invest a lot more on how are we going to actually do it, because we need to build, in addition to making people understand this is the social justice agenda per excellence, we need to make people feel confident that, you know, we are going to figure out how to do this properly. Right. So I call on the, you know, our efforts and our narrative this year in the lead up to Finance for Development and COP to be mindful of this, because sometimes when we are in the finance system, we talk about capital and we talk about systems and we talk about the institutions coming together. And we don't do enough in terms of the social element and the just element, and we need that.
Thank you so much, Mafalda, okay? And again, I mean, I see a lot of commonalities, right? Actually, Crispian, 1 minute to win it, okay?
So I've already said I'd like to see PDBs standing more firmly behind country platforms. So to get very specific, what I would like to see us launch this year is a quick start funding mechanism that can support countries at the early stage as they're developing their platforms. And I know the GCF readiness work does some of this, but we're also trying to encourage philanthropies to crowd in a pooled mechanism that works alongside the vertical climate funds to enable this. And I think that could be a strong recommendation coming out of FIX.
Fantastic, thank you. We are in the red zone, Boitumelo. I see the clock here. It's a red clock here. So yes, as co-host of FIX, right, your wish, and you hear this, I mean, a lot of collaboration, a lot of positivism, you know, ideas, but also, again, I mean, a sense of accountability, right, to actually deliver on this. And let's not creating new stuff, let's deliver on the things that we have there. So please, Boitumelo, the last words.
I think it's about using what we have. The role of PDBs as creating an enabling environment. You know, he mentioned constraint is an opportunity for innovation, and I think PDBs have a role to play in, you know, bringing together government and private sector. So we actually need PDBs to play, you know, a much more innovative role in enabling private sector participation, whether it's in the creation of, you know, never seen guarantee structures before, or investment platforms, or investment or sector, programs. And I think that's what we need to do as PDBs, play that multiplier effect to enable speed and to also enable scale. And my last comment on FIX. FIX is a system. The strength of a system is in its diversity. And I think when you look at, the partners within FIX, whether it's civil society, academia, public development banks, multilateral government, it is a system that can remain principled, because I think principles are important, because they're very difficult to change, right? You can't change. So we remain committed to our principles and to also enable solutions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Right on time. Well, we are like 20 minutes, 20 seconds, but it's fine. Thank you so much, everyone. Great panel. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to our panel moderator, Mr. Salvador. Thank you very much to our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, I would just like to take this opportunity to encourage you to take to heart the theme of this year's summit, the Summit of Solutions. Engage in the breakaway sessions that we go into, really present solutions, interrogate solutions, bring new solutions forward, because as you've heard, this is the only way that we move things forward, is by collaborating with one another. In terms of housekeeping rules, the next plenary session that will be taking place in this auditorium will begin at 2 o'clock. Between now and then, there will be various breakaway sessions around the convention center that you are freely welcome to attend. We encourage that you attend as many of them as possible and engage in those individual sessions. From a admin point of view, if anybody has found or misplaced something, please feel free to find me, locate me at any point in time. If something has been lost from your perspective, please just reach out to me and we'll see if we can help you locate it. But until 2 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen, please have a lovely day, and we will see you back later this afternoon, where we will be looking at the transition of finance and propelling green industrialization through the use of critical minerals, particularly focused on emerging markets and developing economies.